Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report Spotlight. Today we have a returning guest, Jim Willie. Jim is the editor of the Hat Trick Letter. You can find it on goldenjackass.com. Check out his newsletter. He is highly considered one of the leading experts on central bank policy, global U.S. dollar rejection, and the gold and silver market. He is also highly regarded for his forecasts on currency-related collapses, bank defaults. He is on top of the gold market, and I am very happy to have Jim back on the X22 Report Spotlight. Jim, welcome back to the Spotlight.
Oh, it's good to be back. I always enjoy being on your show, and I know you got a large audience, and there's usually a good response to the show with subscriptions, and I'm just jazzed to be on your show again. And we were saying before, these aren't just interesting times, they're dangerous times, and at the same time, these are historical changes that we're undergoing. In 20 years from now, they're going to be talking about the Lehman event. They're going to be talking about the U.S. bond bust of 2019 and 20. They're going to be talking about these events in the future. And what's going to be different this time is that the people writing the history books won't be the same people, because the prevailing agents, the prevailing nations will write the history book, and it's not going to be the same as 20 years ago and 40 years ago. We got to change the guard, is what I'm saying. Asia and the Asian supergiants, superpowers, they're in charge. And this all comes apart at their will, at their timing, at their discretion. And what's kind of interesting right now is that China made a decision a few years ago. They're not going to spark the breakdown. They got away with it in 2006 and 7. They sold on a massive basis Fannie Mae bonds. And they put out the story, and the U.S. government, backed the story that they're going to give emphasis to the treasuries. And then later, they're going to give emphasis to the short-term treasury bills. Okay, that's 2 steps there. In other words, they were going to abandon the Fannie Mae bonds, and then they were going to abandon the long-term treasury bonds. But they never put it in terms of abandoning it, put it in terms of what they're going to emphasize next. So China sparked the Lehman incident. They don't want to spark this one. This is going to be a systemic Lehman moment. That's what I call it. It's going to be a global breakdown. Whereas in 2007 and 8, the subprime bond was the mortgages and all the derivatives, like, the collateralized debt obligations and synthetics and CDO squared, which just means they amplified doubly so the leverage. Now the subprime bond is the treasury bond. The U.S. treasury bond is subprime, and it's the basis for forex reserves, foundations for banking systems. It's the subprime bond. So what I'd like to give emphasis to today, Dave, if we can, is the reset and the breakdown that are both in progress, and the trade deals that are at work. And this is it's not like people go to a meeting and they come out half an hour later. This is an ongoing meeting that's going to last for months and months and months, because the decision is going to be all the ramifications and all the details for retiring the dollar as the global reserve currency. And that has 20 gigantic impacts, manifestations, repercussions. I'm convinced that we have begun the reset. I think it began probably around March. I mean, a lot of people think, oh, gosh, wasn't it really March a year ago that the Shanghai Petro Yuan contract began? Wasn't that really the beginning of the reset? I think that was like the flags being, whipped around like you see on the Indianapolis 500. Yeah, that was the big starting event. But it was very slow motion. And now a year later, we have much bigger motion. And we got, breakdown in the bond market. Our bond market is now broken. That's my opinion. It's broken. We're just permitting this AIDS-infected old street prostitute to parade around as an elegant woman of elite stature.
Do you think the China trade deal where they were negotiating for quite a while. Do you think they actually made a deal behind the scenes, or do you think it's still going on in front of the public?
I think there are probably about 6 or 8 primary planks, and most of them have been decided upon. But the big distinction here, and this is extremely important, is that the timing is not agreed upon. It's like you say, okay, you've got 3 properties and you want to sell them all. You're going to sell one next year. That's the plan. And then you got some maintenance to do and some repairs and maybe a small room addition to prepare the second one for sale. So we're thinking like next year, next summer. And the third one, we don't really know, but we're going to put that out there and say that in the next several years, we're going to get that done too. So you've got a plan to sell 3 properties, and you got a buyer, and you got some funding. Some of the funding is not all arranged, and that's the plan. But the dates aren't set. The dates aren't set for a very good reason, because when certain dates kick in, the impact with certain financial markets is profound. So here's my gut. Here's my gut feeling. There were 2 principal deals struck, and Secretary Mnuchin, Stephen Mnuchin, our movie director, Goldman Sachs guy.
Right.
Yeah, Goldman Sachs is still in the room. He had 2 separate announcements on the same day in early April. The first announcement went like this. We finally have an agreement on the financial reforms that we have planned that involve the currency market. Okay, let's put that on the table. Then a few hours later, same day, he said, we now have an enforcement mechanism for the trade deal that will be put into force, and I can't come up with the exact words, make final the consequences of trade deficits. He didn't say that, but that's the implication. Okay, so the first issue, this is what we're piecing together, the Jackass colleagues. This is not easy stuff. It's not easy. Okay, the currency element to the financial trade deal. What was that? Well, you have to look at what have we been pushing for? What have the Chinese been saying? No, we won't do that. No, we're not prepared to do that just yet. Let's keep talking. A month later, no, we're not ready to do that. Okay, what the Chinese have, I think, agreed to is a 20%, just rough figure, 20% currency upward revaluation. The Chinese RMB, I believe, has been agreed upon. The timing is not set, but the deal has been struck for a 20% or so, maybe 18, maybe 25, maybe floating within a range. But the agreement has been made to lift the value of the Chinese yuan RMB currency. Now, why would they resist? Well, for obvious reasons. They'll lose their trade advantage. Everything that they sell to Europe, Middle East, North America, Australia, everything will be a little bit more expensive, and they'll lose that trade pricing edge. Okay, so they resisted. What did they want in return for agreeing to a currency revaluation upward for the RMB? What did they push for? If the United States says, oh, no, we can't do that. That's out of the question. So 2 months later, they bring it back, put it on the table. And the U.S. says, no, we're not ready for that. We're still in a dollar-dominant world. The Chinese want to double the gold price. They want to triple the gold price. They want the gold price to move toward 10,000. It's stuck at 1,300. It's an absolute joke. So the Chinese were resistant to raise the currency and lose their trade advantage, and they've been pushing for a much higher gold price relative to all currencies. And, some of the trade negotiators and the expert analysts who watch it, they say the Chinese are looking for a devaluation of currencies relative to the main. It's relative to gold. They want all the currencies to drop relative to gold. Turn it around. They want the gold price to rise versus all currencies. Okay, so I think the deal has been struck. 20% rise in the RMB, lost trade advantage, but they'll still have a pretty ample activity in the trade front. And in return, the United States will allow and work toward and get out of the way as obstacles for a doubled and tripled gold price. Okay, but there's more to it. The enforcement mechanism. Okay, we'll just begin on the enforcement mechanism by talking about the higher gold price versus the dollar, the euro, the pound, etc., yen, and Australian dollar, and all the rest. The enforcement mechanism is going to be different. Okay, now let's just take an example like Germany versus the Middle East. Where's the trade advantage? Well, let's just say there's a slight advantage for the Germans. So they have a trade surplus versus a couple of Arab oil monarchies. Okay, the Germans have a trade surplus. Therefore, the result after it's washed through is that on the Forex market, the German currency, the euro, this argument is much more appropriate when the Germans were on the mark, the Deutschmark. Okay, so let's just call it the euro for now. So the Germans and Europe have a trade advantage with some Arab monarchies, and the euro therefore goes up versus those small currencies like, the Saudi Rial, and every little country there has its own currency. Okay, my point is that if A and B have a trade deficit and it favors A, country A, then A's currency goes up a little bit versus country B. That has been the enforcement mechanism. And the basis of that is that the dollar is the center of the currencies. Everything floats versus the dollar. What's your currency worth? It's versus the dollar. What's the yen worth versus the dollar? What's the Canadian versus the US dollar? Okay, so that enforcement mechanism is going to have a reform. It's going to be, if country A has a trade advantage on a net basis overall, then their price of gold goes down. If a country has a net trade deficit, they must pay higher price for gold. The enforcement mechanism goes to gold and away from the dollar. You won't see so much currency A and currency B adjusting versus each other because of trade impact. What you'll see is the gold price changes in those two countries. Now, here's where it gets very difficult and the high, super high risk arises for the U.S. The enforcement mechanism also involves payment of gold. So if you got A and B nation, the United States versus nation B. Nation B has a surplus with the United States. So therefore, the United States has to hand over some gold on, say, a net quarterly basis. And furthermore, that country gets a discount on their gold price if they have other surpluses with many other nations, like on a net basis. Okay, so a deficit nation must give up its gold. A deficit nation is going to be under tremendous pressure to find foreign investment. Okay, a little known concept to most average financial watchers and observers is something called the current account deficit. It consists of the trade deficit plus the investment deficit. Now, years ago, the United States had a huge trade deficit, but they sold a lot of bonds. We sold a lot of treasury bonds, sold a lot of corporate bonds, sold a lot of property like Manhattan, Miami, Los Angeles, and Texas. We had a lot of investment capital coming into the country, and it offset some of the trade gap. So the current account deficit, that is the final element that is looked at when you have these adjustments on a net quarterly basis coming regarding the currencies and gold. Remember, when I talk about currencies, There's going to be adjustments with the currencies, but the king of currencies is going to be recognized as gold. And, Basel III just made the announcement. I think it was in effect last day of March, called April. They didn't want to say it's going into effect on April 1st, April Fool's Day. So they officially recognized gold as an asset for ratio calculations. Okay. Which brings me to a very interesting point, Dave. Okay, that's the whole, the nut of the trade deal, and it's ongoing. It's just ongoing. It's not going to be something that's finished in 2 months. We're going to be talking about the trade deal in September. We're going to be talking about the trade deal, we're going to finalize things before the end of the year, 2019. There are many, many details. And the United States has been dragging its feet, dragging its ass every step of the way. Now, they might say, the Chinese, you're very reluctant to do the following, and we're quite angry that you won't allow the yuan to be upward revalued. You're dragging your feet, China, Beijing. What's your problem? No. The Chinese are objecting to recent rules to try to, and not just copyright, which China is not on the right side of. But the Chinese objecting to now is the U.S. and the British are trying to get like an invasion into the banking sector so that the Western banks and financial firms can operate more freely, can conduct subsidiary purchases, acquisitions, can be involved in some of the markets a little more openly, like as primary dealers, sort of, whatever their equivalent is in China. And the Chinese are saying, get the hell out of the room. No, you're not getting in the room like that. You're not going to be operating in the financial sector like you do in the West, where you monkey things up, you create hot money, you have false attacks on currencies and nations that you don't like. No, we don't want any of that. Okay, so the Chinese, in a legitimate way, are objecting to control mechanisms in the financial sector that the U.S. wants. And the Chinese are slow in coming to agreements on copyright. I got to tell you something about China. In the 1980s and 90s, China had a reputation, and it was very much earned. There was something called the Chinese Army Corporation, and they openly violated copyrights. They would just make duplicates of Microsoft software, a lot of different software, Lotus software, all the spreadsheets and, word processing software. Okay, that was just for the computer world. Then they would do loads and loads of copyright violations of movies, and they would sell the CDs. And they would do loads of copyright violations of music and have sales all across Asia without properly paying for the copyrights. And then they went on these charades where they bring in the steamrollers, that would lay down asphalt roads, pavement, and they would crush thousands of CDs. But we never knew what CDs they were crushing, because over on the other side of town, they were still making them. Okay, so it was all for show. What I'm saying is the Chinese were some of the worst copyright violators the world has ever seen for software, music, and movies. Now they're trying to clean their act up because they want foreign investment. But they want foreign investment without financial infiltration. That's a good word. Invasion, infiltration, which will enable attacks. The Chinese want to control their financial sector. They have very long memories going back 100 years. So,
Jim, let me just ask you on the gold aspect of this, when you're saying that the Chinese want the gold price to go up double or triple, and you're saying that the United States is not ready for this, is the Trump administration, are they willing to go double or triple in gold price? Or are they just waiting for a certain period of time to do it, the right time to do it?
I don't think they want to do that at all, ever. It's something they must do. They must allow the gold standard to enter the framework, and that means that the dollar phases out. Now, look at the elements of the petrodollar. There's 6 5, 6, 7 major elements of the petrodollar structure, and they're all breaking, and they've been breaking for years. And one of the last elements to break is the tight Saudi connection for dollar sales of oil. Now they've got a linkage with Russia. Some Saudi oil is being sold in rubles, in euros, because it's not any longer complete dominance in the US dollar framework. So Trump realizes the dollar must go away. He realizes the dollar debt can never be paid. He realizes trade exclusively in the dollar, even in the oil market, it's going away. He's realizing this Belt and Road Initiative, despite how much we try to denigrate it and say and insult it and call it a conspiracy for Chinese global control and other stupidity like that, Trump realizes it's not only not going away, it's going to take over and develop critical mass. So Trump, I think, is delaying as much as he can because of two major, well, no, it's really three things, and it's the three I've been mentioning for months. We don't have enough gold to back our currency. Fort Knox is empty. It's got tungsten. These are gold-clad tungsten bars. There are thousands of them. They're tungsten. They're not gold. Okay, we've got some gold in West Point. Why there? Because that's where the Army cadets are guarding it. They're on duty. They're not, official, mature soldiers, but they're young. They're bearing rifles and they're learning, and it's safe. It's secure. But there's not much gold there. That's where I think it is it's a station for gold in motion. Okay, the mines like Barrick and the other corrupt entities, they have huge input of gold. Where does it go? It goes to West Point. West Point's pretty close to Manhattan. Okay, it's the same state. It's just up the river a little bit. Okay, we don't have the gold. That's one.
What about gold in the ground?
Yeah, well, that's fine. That's all very nice and pretty. It takes a lot of time to get there. We don't have the gold for the dollar. The second point is that we have an enormous debt. We can't say, oh, let's back our new currency and have this wonderful new legitimate structure. First, we don't have the gold. Second, what happens to the old debt? You can't say, well, we're going to issue this new and we're just going to forget about the rest. No, you got hundreds of billions of dollars in investment by foreigners. They want to know, what about our money? Because if you just renege on it all, we're not just going to tell you we won't lend you any money. We're going to tell you we won't trade with you. We won't export to you. We won't touch you. We won't even visit you as tourists. We won't issue visas to you. Okay, we got to resolve the debt. And that's where the debt default comes. It's going to be a restructure. It's going to be 30, 60%. The third thing we don't have is industry. And this is something that Trump talked about in the campaign trail and quickly put aside when he became president and increased the military budget and did the exact opposite of what he said he was going to do. In other words, he didn't have the time, he didn't have the situation, didn't have the conditions to do what he promised, and probably needed all 4 years and maybe more to set the stage. We don't have the gold, we didn't resolve the debt, we don't have industry. Okay, I like mentioning this because it really puts it into perspective for people to think. We have now a $900 billion trade deficit annual. If you just focus at the $1,300 price, that equates in 1 year to 20,000 tons of gold. Our trade deficit, if we're forced by a new enforcement mechanism based in gold, we must forfeit 20,000 tons of gold in the first year. Now, we might attract some foreign investment. This is a big Trump goal. We're going to attract foreign investment for industry. Oh, really? They don't trust us because we change the rules whenever it suits us, because we break treaties when it suits us. So we're not trusted. Trump has kind of, to the side of his mouth, said, we need to work on this trust issue. You got to be very watchful in how that comes out of his mouth. He knows that foreign investment, remember, trade deficit plus foreign investment equals your current account. And I think we're losing on the foreign investment while we're losing in a massive way on the trade side. So in other words, the trade deficit is going to be made perhaps a little worse by the current account deficit when you factor in investments. I don't think, my gosh, who are the biggest buyers of treasury bonds these days? It's the Department of Treasury. We're buying our own debt with derivative machinery. Okay, we're not ready for the trade to turn to gold. We're not ready for the debt to be backed by gold. We're not ready for the trade deficit to be settled by gold. We're not ready for the gold standard. That's why we delay. I said before, a lot of elements have been agreed upon in the trade negotiations and talks with China. I think China represents the East and we represent the West. The dates are not set. So when the Chinese objected to copyright issues and to bank sector infiltration by foreigners and those issues, Trump walked out of the room, called the Chinese uncooperative, and said, we're going to slap tariffs on you. Okay, here's one of the ugliest things I've discovered in economic statistics in all my 15 years of this newsletter. When we slap a tariff on a bunch of products and it's reflected in prices, we actually say that it's a discount on the price. We lower the consumer price index by that amount, and we don't just take it away from the increase. We call it a reduction. And we actually say that the foreigners are paying that tariff and giving us a discount. It's the most absurd lie I've ever heard. It's so much worse a lie than just saying, well, we got 2% inflation and we got this for a nominal GDP, and therefore we reduce with the deflator and wow, we got 2% growth. No, we got about 4% negative on GDP every single year. Here's a little fact that just came out a month ago from John Williams of Shadow Government Statistics. He said we have only 2 quarters since 2004 that are positive. 2 quarters out of 14 years. That's 56 quarters, and we got 2 that are positive. We're in a massive, vicious, chronic recession. Okay, so I'd like to mention something. Had it on my tongue, and I wrote it down to make sure I didn't forget. Hugo Salinas Price is a champion of the precious metals sector. And being from Mexico, he seems to prefer, and it's legitimate, he seems to prefer discussions based on silver because Mexico is the #1 silver producer in the world. I'm not even sure who's close second. I think Russia's right up there. I think Bolivia's probably right up there. Anyway, Hugo Salinas Price put out a very interesting essay a few weeks ago, and I latched on. I try to read everything he writes that comes my way. I don't go out and seek everything he's got for the week. He's a very smart guy, and he's actually a Hat Trick Letter subscriber. Not only that, but he bought 2 gifts for friends of his. One was an economist and one is a banker, and they continue. And that's been going on for about 3 years. So he's got 3 subscriptions, including his own. Well, he sends me things once in a while. And he had a very big event a year ago. It was the St. Pete, Russia Economic Forum, which is the only global economic forum. Davos is a banker barbecue, and God only knows what goes on in the basements there. He was invited to give a speech backed by his own research paper to the Russians at that forum about the benefits and the plans and the whole structure and legitimacy and benefits of a silver-backed currency. He was producing the argument for a legitimate silver-backed ruble. I mean, you can always say silver and gold, but he was making the argument for silver. And he got sick. He had something very serious medically, and he told me about it. And for his own privacy, I won't give details. But he said I couldn't deliver my own speech, so someone went in my stead, and they canceled the talk and just had a booth to pass out the research report. Okay, so that's a very undesirable outcome for an aggressive, wonderful plan. Okay, here's what he's saying now. He's saying that he has information that there are several central banks that have hired third-party financial firms. They're not necessarily banks. They could be, like a consulting firm, a financial firm, okay? Several central banks have contracts with closely aligned financial firms to take their U.S. treasuries and to sell them on the open market and convert to gold. Dump bonds, buy gold. Dump the dollar, buy gold bars. Okay? He said it's not just a few countries. Okay, this is very big development because it follows the Basel III rule that allows gold to be considered accountable asset for, say, asset ratios and other compliance regarding Basel rules. Okay, so first we get the rule change, and I like to point out the whole plan by the former board chairman in the 80s and 90s, Zylstrom, and William White, who in the 2000 decade was their chief economist. The plan was to react to the insolvency of the major central banks by loading up on gold and then raising its price tenfold. I think this process has begun, and there's some frustration by clients and friends and other people who write to me and say, hey, Jim, you talked about Basel III rule change as being positive for gold. Why is it going down? And I say, this is a long-term issue, and gold will prevail. I did not say the gold price would rise in April. I said the whole situation, the whole platform, the entire structure is gradually making changes to prepare for a much higher gold price. I didn't want to say it at the same time, and it was in the back of my mind. I mean, I'm being honest here. I didn't want to say, look for these bastards to bring the gold price down so they can continue to buy it on the cheap. And that's what they're doing. And it's not going to last forever. And it's not going to last for 2 years. It's not going to last for 18 months. I don't know how long it's going to last. But word's going to get out, like with Hugo Salinas Price. Word's going to get out, who knows, in London. Word's going to get out in China that other central banks are converting their treasury bonds to gold, just like Russia did. Russia got rid of them all. In fact, funny story, I probably told this before, but it was about 4 months ago, the Russians got rid of the last $48 billion worth of treasury bonds. Well, they really didn't. What they did was they had $48 billion in treasury bonds in European banks, and they used it as collateral to buy gold. So they were dollar neutral, but not empty-handed of dollars. A big distinction. So they didn't care what happened to the dollar. And if gold went up relative to the dollar, they won because they're long gold, short dollar. Okay, so we're now in an early phase of the conversion from treasury bonds to gold. And I guarantee you that it won't just be treasury bonds. It'll be the weakest other sovereign bond, like the British, the gilt. The British gilt is their version of the bond. And I think it's going to be dumped in favor of gold. The Japanese yen, it's kind of is that a mixed bag. They've got enormous federal debt, but they've also got tremendous export trade industry and big surpluses. And they're still investing some in gold. I got word from Euro Raj, who's working in the financial sector. I got word from him about a year ago. He said, Jim, one of the big items in the buzz in the financial sector is that the Japanese are quietly as possible, they're dumping their treasury bonds and buying gold and putting it in their central bank. And I said, you think they're lying on their balance sheet? He said, oh, absolutely. So country after country are reporting their treasury bond holdings. And I think country after country are lying. Country after country are building up their gold reserves, and country after country are lying.
You said that the Chinese were looking to raise the gold price, 2 times, 3 times. And everyone, as you've been talking about, has been ramping up on gold. If the gold price goes up 2, 3, 4 times, whatever it is, if that goes up, what happens to the central bank debt notes? I mean, the ECB debt note, the Federal Reserve debt note. Is everyone, you're going to see gold triple in price. And what happens to the debt notes? What happens to the central banks?
Well, let's just say there's a point in time, let's call it December of 2020. Okay? Between now and then, these central banks are going to be converting their sovereign bonds, led by the treasuries, but also Euro bonds and British gilts and Japanese government bonds, JGBs. They're going to be dumping the treasuries et al. And buying up gold. So you can't just say, well, look at what they have now. Right now, in this snapshot of time, gold is much higher, and the bonds all take a 30 to 60% haircut. My gosh, they're going to be ruined. No, between now and December of 2020, they're going to be loading up on gold. They're going to be dropping down on their sovereign bonds, and they're going to be lying about it on their balance sheets because their financial firms operating on their hip are part of their balance sheet. And they're not going to report that to you. So the snapshot between now and let's say it's like 18 months from now, the snapshot between now and then will have a market change in the amount of gold that they hold and a market decline in the amount of treasury bonds they hold, so that when you have this tripled gold price, they're going to come out in really good shape. Now, I don't know if they're going to get rid of their insolvency, David. It's way too big. I think we're going to have, there's kind of a funny joke going around. It's the Federal Reserve cannot go bankrupt because it's not a business. It doesn't have that kind of structure. It has a balance sheet. But I think what's going to happen is the Federal Reserve, 2 things. The Federal Reserve is going to enjoy a much better position, much lower negative side of its insolvency. But at the same time, it might lose some of its board owners. So the ownership is going to shift. Its insolvency is going to become less bad. But they don't declare bankruptcy because they're not stuck with liquidity issues and, financial reports to their shareholders and, oops, their creditor just went away. Who's the Fed's creditor? Themselves. They just print money. Okay, so it could be that secretly they're going to print a lot of money and buy gold. How does that improve their balance sheet? They're able to fabricate money. Okay, you can't think of the Federal Reserve as like a bank. You can't do that. It's a different entity. It's a corrupt entity. It's a criminal entity. It's a fraudulent entity. It's a secretive entity. It's a vile entity. Okay, so we're going to have a transition period, and the frustrating part, Dave, is that we're not going to be told what they're doing. If Price is Right, there used to be a TV show, Price is Right. Yes. I watched it when I was a kid. If Hugo Salinas Price is correct, and I think he is, because I was thinking the same thing for quite a while. It's been a topic of discussion. I would say to Euroraj or to George of the Comex or Andy in the Andes or Sky Crane, my buddies who are very smart, London Paul. I would say, my gosh, if these central banks load up on gold, we might be the last to know. And they said, oh, yeah, they'll just do it in the side. They'll do it in shadows. But Price put it out more cleanly. He said closely aligned financial firms. And there's kind of a dominant, what's the word? There's a reality, a secondary consequence in reality to that. That closely aligned financial firm is part of their greater journal, their book, their accounting sheet. Okay, here's what we show the public, but the rest is this big and it has 4 other firms. And we're not going to tell you anything that we're doing. The last thing they're going to do is to say, the Euro Central Bank and the Bank of England have aggressively begun a gold campaign, and they're transferring $30 billion a month for gold purchase, and Turkey is helping them. So's Dubai. So's Shanghai. They're not going to tell you that.
Yeah, but
that's stupid. It's only a naive person who would say, well, obviously they should. No, they shouldn't. They're not honorable organizations. They're going to go out and buy it, and they're going to put out press reports that gold is junk so that you sell and they buy. This is not new. This is going to be a frustrating battle. And there's going to be a point of inflection. And this is what I'm trying to study now. And, it's something it's just not easy, but there's going to be a point of inflection where the Western central banks will be buyers, and they're going to do harm to their own wretched, corrupt structure. And I don't know what the weak link is. Many people say, well, it's obviously the COMEX and the LBMA and all their exchange for physical that eradicates, delivery notices and contracts on the delivery side. Yeah, okay. Well, let's get a little more specific. Where's the breakdown going to be? Where's the bust going to happen? Is there going to be, a group of class action suits against the LBMA and COMEX? Right now, if they try that, they'll get shot. They get run over by an unmarked black SUV. So what's the point of inflection going to be? I don't know, but I think it's going to be gold shortage.
Won't the everyday person start to realize around the world? I mean, if gold starts moving up, now they're looking at 1,300 and, now gold is 2,000, now gold's 2,500 and it moves up like this. I mean, how does it affect the everyday person? I mean, people are going to notice. I mean, they might lie about it, but they're going to notice something.
Well, they're going to notice a premium in the price. Okay, the official price is $13.02, but you tell me I have to pay $13.90? The premium. That's just one of many items. It could be, I want to buy $240,000 worth of gold, and I got to pay this 15% premium, and now you're telling me that I have to ration my purchases? I want $240,000, but it's going to be spread over 4 months, $60,000 a month. I don't like that. I'm going to look for another broker, and you hear the same thing.
And that's when people start to realize there's something going on.
Yeah, but those are just 2 simple hints. It's going to be other things like, jewelers. Jewelers come out with statements and say, we're having a lot of trouble finding supply. We got back orders with the Swiss Pamps. And then you hear the Krugerrands are not available. What's going on? The mint in South Africa. It's temporarily shut down. What's going on? Okay, many, many hints. These are what I call the points of inflection. We're going to see some events that are going to be different. It's going to be in the next several months. And I've just laid out several possibilities, and you brought up your own. These are going to be the hints. Something's really wrong here. Something's changing. This wasn't true a year ago. This is really looking like a breakdown. And then 2 months later, another signal. Like, I'll just make something up. The British decide to shut down Dubai. And they come up with lots of poppycock bullshit like, lack of compliance and a lot of, rampant smuggling from India and Turkey. And we're going to have to shut down Dubai. They're scared of Dubai. Dubai's bringing in African supply. Dubai's bringing in smuggled supply from India, Turkey. Dubai bringing in Arab supply from the Gulf region for rich royals who are panicking, who are bankrupt, got lots of bills to pay. Okay, that's not something we saw a few years ago. Okay, I'm looking for these different points of inflection, and there are going to be some pretty ugly surprises in there. And you got to watch it because, okay, I'll give you an example of twisting the news. Recently, the United States news, I hate to call it Western news because the U.S. dominates so much. They came out with stories that there's lack of investment in some of the strategic metals and rare earth metals. Lack of investment, now there's shortage. No, there's not. That's wrong. That's a lie. It's Western news putting on a false spin to cover up a situation. What's the reality? The Chinese have now cornered a large portion of the industrial metals, strategic metals, and rare earth metals, and they're not selling in dollars. That's hardly lack of investment. So that it's another point of inflection. Okay, let's translate that into the gold and precious metals industry, Dave. Let's say that in 2 or 3 or 4 months we hear stories that oh my gosh, there's just a whole lot less silver bars and gold bars available to purchase by Western investors. There must be, again, lack of investment in the mining industry. No. The Chinese hold the supply and they're not selling it in dollars. These are the points of inflection. And it's getting very, very interesting. I'd like to cover, before we run out of time, we're not at the end of time, but I want to talk about the Belt and Road and how this all fits in.
Okay. Well, before you do that, let me just ask you this.
Yeah.
With when we go back to the whole China deal and the timing isn't right and the Trump administration, they're trying to work it all out. How does the U.S. fit into all this? Does the Trump administration have a plan moving forward? I know we've been in a central bank economy for a very long time. I know the GDP, unemployment, all these statistics are manipulated. We know that, this is not just started yesterday. This has been going on for a very long time. And we know that Trump, yes, there were a lot of promises during the campaign and, Congress is fighting back and all this other stuff. He's only been in the presidency for 2.5 years. To reverse everything within 2.5 years and make everything perfect for what is coming is going to be very, very difficult. What do you think they do have in place to try to head this off?
I think it's two things. One is the reality toward progress, and the other is the obstruction of the East. The reality in progress is that many different signals are out there that Trump and the administration, with the help of the White Hats of the Pentagon, have actually seized I have no idea the exact amount, a few trillion of elite corrupt assets. Okay? I'm just going to throw out a number that
would this be gold? You think that?
No, assets.
Just that. Okay.
Like commercial buildings,
okay.
Ownership of a string of banks, ownership of a retail chain, like Bronfman. Okay. Bronfman of Canada. That's a retail chain. They own a retail chain. They own a lot of things. It's not just Seagram's liquor. It's a lot of things. Let me just throw out that it's $5 trillion. Okay. Let's suppose Trump and the White Hats and the Pentagon have been going out there and been very busy, and they've seized $5 trillion in assets. Okay, that's something positive toward reducing the $22 trillion in debt. And I have a joke. I say, well, gosh, they better stay busy because they need to seize $1 trillion a year just to stay ahead of the game. Okay, what else have they done? There are widespread reports, and it is super difficult to confirm, but it appears that the Trump administration has recovered some Asian hiding of U.S. gold. There were big rumors several months ago that Trump recovered the stolen Fort Knox. and it was in the Pacific Rim. I always am honest about this. I don't know whether it was Malaysia or Philippines or Indonesia. I don't know. They're all loaded with hidey holes. And before World War II and during World War II, they built vaults in the mountains and murdered all the construction workers so that no one would know the location. And I mean, there's a lot of really sinister stuff going on with the hidden gold troves. And these aren't small. They're like $1 trillion troves. Some are $500 billion, some are $3 trillion. And unfortunately, many years ago, like 3 generations ago, the Swiss were involved in some of these. And they've got some of the Asian gold, and there's the Yamashita gold, and the Black Eagle, the Black Lily. There's lots of names for them. They're not all the same. There are a few. If I had to guess, I'd say there are 3 or 4 gigantic $1 trillion troves. Okay, the word got out about a year ago that Trump found and grabbed and has possession of the stolen Fort Knox gold. Who stole it? Trump? I'm sorry. Who stole the gold? Bush, Clinton, Rubin, Paulson. Okay? The Department of Treasury and the dark side of Langley. They stole it. And they replaced a lot of the gold by working around the clock with a Canadian, it's called Eberhard, Canadian refinery. Why'd they choose that refinery? Because it's right next to a giant tungsten mine. They worked around the clock to make tungsten bars clad by thin layer of gold, and they shipped them largely to Hong Kong banks. The biggest victim of the tungsten bar, fake gold bar export is Hong Kong. If you look at the Department of Treasury quarterly reports, Department of Commerce quarterly reports, there's a line item in there, Hong Kong, and the column is industrial metals and supplies. And it sticks out like a gigantic thumb, 20 times larger than any other entry in that column. So we're returning $2 billion a month to Hong Kong. I believe that's part of a restitution deal, and they promised not to tell what it's all about. Okay, so the point is, Trump, I think, has recovered some gold. I talked about, what are the positives? Maybe seizing $3, $4, $5, $6 trillion. Maybe it's $7 trillion now. I don't know. I think it's been suspended, though. It's another story all on its own. And I think he's recovered some of the gold. Okay, fine. Remember, I talked about 3 things. We need to source the gold for a gold-backed dollar. We need to remove some of the debt, a good deal of the debt. And we need to reindustrialize so we don't have the problem of an annual trade deficit and forfeit the gold that we put up on the table. Okay. We haven't even begun the reindustrialization. Trump's talked about it. He's talked about it more in the last 2 or 3 months than he ever has. I mean, while president, he talked about it a lot when he was running for office. But, after running for office, it's, bring Goldman Sachs guys, put them in the room, manage the derivatives, and let's increase the military budget. Let's put on hold this reindustrialization gig. Okay, but now he's talking about the reindustrialization, and these are the positives. But again, it's just a plan, and it depends a lot on foreign trust of the United States, which does not exist. The plan involves a lot of different sectors and types of products. I don't have the full list, but here are many of the elements. High-grade optics, telecom, super chips for telecom, super chips for computers, super chips for a lot of different things in technology, like analysis and testing, whatever. Fiber optics, robotics, artificial intelligence. That includes software. A lot of these things the United States is a leader in, but sadly, it's for the benefit of the military. Okay, we've got anti-gravitational propulsion systems. You think we sell them in the open market or put Boeing aircraft markings on them and sell them to foreign countries to alleviate our trade deficit? Hell no! Okay, these are many of the things that might end up on our reindustrialization plan. And I like to mix the reindustrialization plan with the nearly 50 different states with free trade zones. And I had a feature, I get repetitive, but some people haven't heard this. 4 years ago, I had a story. It was a bandied about, publicized story. It was a Chinese-owned shop, a foundry in Alabama, that put out copper tubing. And about 30 or 40% of the output was exported to China. And it was sufficient quality to be used industrially and, for homes and whatever, piping. And this was a typical free trade zone business in Alabama. And some of the deals behind it are suspended 3 years for property tax, suspended 3 years for income tax, and favorable consulting assistance to get this thing off the ground. Maybe a little bit of help in building with that state funding, on-ramps, the infrastructure, a tiny bridge here, a tiny bridge there, on-ramps, a little access road, whatever, maybe connect a rail route, and make this thing an ongoing concern that's successful. Okay, this is the sort of thing we need. We need 20,000 of them a year, and we haven't even begun. We need to alleviate $900 billion a year in trade deficit, which 2 years ago was under 600. This has grown 50% in 2 to 3 years. We are out of control on our debts. They call them the twin deficits, trade and federal, trade and fiscal. We're approaching a fiscal crisis where we can't fund our debt, and we're doing our dead level best to prevent the world from understanding that we're buying our own debt with computer machinery. This is extremely dangerous and cannot be sustained. So we're running out of time, and in the trade talks, Trump is trying to buy time. Okay, I mentioned the positives, now the negative. They're trying to obstruct everything. They're trying to paint China as the villain in the trade talks. Oh, really? Well, they were the ones who wanted to buy all the soybeans. And I'm not talking about a minor amount. I'm talking about 300 million tons. I mean, these are numbers we cannot wrap our heads around. We got hundreds of farm bankruptcies, a lot of them having to do with soybeans. You think they're going to vote for Trump for re-election? I don't know. I have a joke. I mean, I like my jokes. I like to laugh. We're in difficult times. It's not exactly foxhole humor, but it is wartime humor. My joke goes like this. The farm states will only vote for Trump if the alternative is some clown socialist like Bernie Sanders. He's one of the dumbest guys I've ever heard in my life when talking about economic plans. I'd rather listen to Wall Street bankers on economic plans. It's just incredibly stupid stuff coming out of Bernie Sanders' mouth. His idea of an economic plan is to tax, and distribute wealth. Where's the value added, Bernie? Where's the new industrial plants, Bernie? Okay, Trump has a better grip on this, but man, he's got to get moving, and we need to reindustrialize. I don't know what we're waiting. I'll tell you what we're waiting for. We're waiting for the dollar discount. Remember, there's a flip side to this. When we say we want the Chinese currency to go up 20% and remove some of their trade advantage, who gains the trade advantage? The United States. I think we're on a program. I have a kind of a nickname for the trade talks. They're trying to develop a global Plaza Accord. Now, in 1987, there was a Plaza Accord. It's named after a Plaza Hotel in Paris, France. The agreement there was, I'm not going to get this exact, but it's going to be a rough cut correct. There's something like representatives from 5 major nations and their currencies, and they all agreed that the dollar had to go down 15% in order to bring better balance to the Forex market, to foreign direct investment, and to level out export trade, import and export trade. And it was a success. I think what we got going on right now with the U.S. and China is they're trying to work out a global Plaza Accord to bring the dollar down, and therefore necessarily bring up the Chinese yuan. And they're trying to bring gold into the equation because the dollar is done. The dollar, stick a fork in it. This thing is done. one of the saddest things I watch right now is Americans not understanding what's going on with the pathogenesis and demise of the dollar. They're still investing in paper assets for the dollar when the dollar is going to have a massive decline.
So if the dollar is done, that's really a Federal Reserve note. If the dollar is done, which is a Federal Reserve note, it's not issued by, the United States government, the people. Does that mean the Federal Reserve is then done?
I think so. And what we're likely to see is a Treasury note. It's widely discussed that the U.S. is working on a Treasury note to replace the Federal Reserve note. And many naive people think, oh, gosh, this is going to solve everything. Oh, really? What's going to back the Treasury note? And here's my expectation. We're going to come up in the next couple of years, and we're going to lay out on the table a gold-backed dollar, and it's going to be fraudulent. And we're going to threaten to kill anybody who puts out the word that our gold is actually tungsten. And we're going to threaten all the independent auditors who come to evaluate our gold reserves and to report on it with global research reports, posted around the world, hundreds of nations reading it. They're going to falsify the audit report. And the big question to me is, how long will it take for the fraud on the audit and the fraud on the quality of gold to become known? And I'm thinking it's going to be something like 12 to 24 months. And that is the period of time when this new Treasury note dollar is going to be at risk of a sudden decline. And when it is revealed as fraudulent, the new dollar will decline in a big way. And when that happens, the U.S. economy is going to enter the worst depression it's seen since 1932.
So let me just get this straight. So you're saying that the Federal Reserve note is going to die, and you were saying that Trump, his administration, found gold, and they have the gold, and we're going to be a gold-backed dollar. But if he found the gold, you're saying this gold is not real that he found? No, he found real gold. Okay. What we got in Fort Knox is fake gold. What we show is fake gold. If we have a new dollar, I think in the early round we're going to use fake gold. We're not going to bring forward the treasure trove of gold, because think of it as from a crime scene element. If we're forced to forfeit gold in large volumes to settle up according to the enforcement mechanism, and we must forfeit the gold as per our trade deficit, we're going to want to hand over fake gold. Okay. And that's when I think the trouble is going to come, because these countries are going to say, wait a minute, you just gave us 200 tons of gold, and it's not even 5% gold. The rest is tungsten. Tungsten's worth $70 a ton. Okay? That's when the U.S. is going to be, I think, at its peak of isolation, where the foreign directed investment is going to vanish, where the foreigners buying our debt is going to vanish. We're going to have to find a way to continue to sell our debt. And that means we're going to be going up to 5, 6, 7% and maybe higher after the fraud is revealed. Okay, we got a transition period. We're going to have a chance to do the right thing, and we never do. We're going to have a chance to be honest and legitimate and full of integrity and join the global community of nations, and we're going to fake it. We're going to lie and cheat and steal like we always do. We're never honest since 1971. Maybe this time it's different.
Maybe this time we need that period of time that I described, the 2 years for the U.S. to be revealed as a dishonest broker in the gold-backed currency. And then, after we've reindustrialized, out comes the legitimate gold. I don't think we're going to use legitimate, clean, 3.9 or 5.9 gold quality bars to back our dollar while we still have a huge trade deficit, and we've not yet reindustrialized. I think we're going to bring out the fake gold, and we're going to forfeit the fake gold, and we're going to say F you to the countries that receive our fake gold, and then we're going to trot out the real gold, and we're going to be a pariah among nations, and it's going to be very interesting to watch how we're isolated and how we return to legitimacy. We're going to need new leadership. I think personally, Dave, we need a continental Congress and rebuild the U.S. government. I think it is beyond repair. It is so far gone. It is pathetic.
Well, isn't that the reset? I mean, it's just not an economic reset. I think it's a country reset. I think that's what we need.
I think it's what we need, but I don't think it's what we're going to get. Okay, you brought up the many sides, the multi-sided reset. Let me bring up what I regard as the economic reset. I've been saying now for about 5 years that legitimate currency must come forward, like a gold-backed currency. And when it comes forward, it cannot come out with a loner. It cannot come out with a single nation saying, we're going to do the right thing. We now have a really good quality currency. It's gold-backed. And okay, let's let it roll. Well, part of the roll is it'll go up in value so much that it would destroy that country's economy. They won't be able to export anything. No one would afford what they sell. They'd be an import giant. Everything would be shit cheap for importing. So my point for the last 5 years is we need a platform. We need a consortium. We need a group to develop that can form a critical mass. And it must get to like 40%. Ideally, it must get to about 70 or 80%. But to get off the ground, it's got to get to 30 and 40%. And this group is going to be an advocate of honest, sound money. This group is going to be involved with trade payment systems that are not the dollar. This group is going to put out a new vehicle like the gold trade note to compete with the treasury bill used for trade payment. This group is going to achieve critical mass. And this group is called the Belt and Road Initiative. It now has a name. And the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, it's now coming back into the news because it's going to be forming a role as banker, a conduit for the Belt and Road Initiative. I mean, it's called One Belt, One Road. It's called Belt and Road Initiative. It's called the Silk Road. It's called the New Silk Road. It's called the Maritime Silk Road. What we're seeing is the Belt and Road Initiative is going to connect Asia with Europe. And at the same time, they're going to work out maritime routes. Now, the Voice has been very big on a certain concept that he says it is not in the early stages. This is well along. It's a $100 billion Chinese investment in Pakistan ports, principally the one port. I think it's called, oh gosh, I don't want to get the name wrong. There's one. It's got 2 syllables and has a W in it and 2 A's. Like Guawad, I can't. Chawad, I'm sorry. There's a port in Pakistan with huge $100 billion investment by the Chinese. What's that all about? They're trying to develop a Mediterranean system. The Chinese bought big port facilities and maritime company, shipping company in Greece. And now they're looking to buy the same in Italy. And this is very big because the Chinese are going to connect the southern route, like Indian Ocean. They're going to connect Iran. They're going to connect Iran and the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia. They're going to connect that with Djibouti and Africa. So, and they're not done. They're working out deals with Russia for the Arctic route. I'm not so hopeful on that because that's going to require nuclear-powered icebreakers, and we've got, a colder northern hemisphere in the next 15 years. So that's going to be my point is that the Belt and Road Initiative originally had a goal of connecting the Chinese Pacific Ocean corner with the European Atlantic corner, coast to coast. But they're not done there. they're taking on the British and Americans head on. The U.S. is so focused on war, we've lost our emphasis on port dominance. The Chinese have built up their port dominance, and now they've got a very interesting little battle going on in Australia. Australia wants to take back their port facilities, and the Chinese are in ownership of the majority of them. So that's going to be a nice, interesting battle. The Chinese are not just at the land routes. The Chinese are working on the maritime routes. The Chinese are going to turn the Orwell model upside down and bring about a new world. Okay, we hear about the New World Order, the evil fascist order from the banker cabal. The Chinese have taken that and they've converted the name to the New Silk World Order. And I think it's going to be gold standard. I think it's going to be honest, sound money. I think it's going to be legitimate systems. And here's the big, big ringer. It's going to force and work toward more equilibrium and less imbalance. Let's just take a country like Costa Rica, for example. What's going to happen with Costa Rica? Well, here there's a significant, it's a small country. It's the size of New Jersey. They've got a trade imbalance. They've got a trade deficit, and they offset it a little bit, not a lot, with foreign money. And the biggest piece of that is Chinese investment in high-rise condos and office buildings. It's mostly condos. The first 2 floors are offices and stores, and the upper 18 to 25 floors are residential. And the Chinese are bringing in money. Okay, so that offsets the trade deficit. They export food. It's not just, it's a lot of fruit. They've got so many fruits and vegetables here. I had to learn new names. It's not just a new name of passion fruit, which is maracuja. No, it's other things like chayote. I never saw chayote before. It's a kind of a squash, and I like it. It's good to eat. It's kind of like a zucchini. It tastes a bit like zucchini, but it's a different form and shape. My point is that Costa Ricans are going to have to export more, and they're going to have to invite foreign investment. Costa Rica is going to have to bring about more balance. They've got a trade balance deficit right now. They're going to need to attract more foreign investment. To do that, they're going to have to build up their ports and infrastructure. Right now, there's another highway being built. It's from San Jose in the center up toward the Atlantic, because there's another highway completed 5 years ago between San Jose and the Pacific. And a Spanish firm did that. Okay, so that investment brought in foreign investment. But now there's income from that. All the toll roads, a good portion of the income from the toll roads go back to Spain. Okay. Costa Rica has to invite and attract foreign investment. And the story here is not a lot different from other countries like Portugal, other countries like Turkey, other countries like Bolivia. They're going to have to attract foreign investment to build up the infrastructure, highways, railways, port facilities, cell towers, broadband fiber optic lines. We need foreign investment for that, but it's so much more. We need foreign investment for, say, light industry and assembly centers. I'm sorry, I have a tickly nose. When I talk a lot, it vibrates the hair in my nose, and I have tickles. Okay. Little countries need to invite the foreign investment. It has to be for structure. It also has to be for plant and equipment. Therefore, it will be smart if it is also to build up the universities and to help the educational system. Now, a country like Costa Rica is going to have to say to a country like Germany or England, we want you to invest $3 billion next year. And England and Germany are going to have to say, what are you going to do for us? And Costa Rica is going to say, we'll give you a discount on all the output. And then Germany and England are going to say, but we need 2 years just to build up the infrastructure. It's inadequate now. And we need more than that to build up the university system, because your local engineers they're not going to be able to cut it. They can't compete. So it's going to have to be a trust issue by the foreign investors. It's going to have to be patience for the 2 to 3 years for things to build up. Ooh, I remember 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, I saw some billboards, and it was in Spanish, obviously, and it showed a worker in kind of a laboratory setting, and it said, "Build high quality for assisting our exports." 2 months later, it was gone. I don't even want to tell you how I think we're balancing the deficit here. It's in trade, and I don't think it's above board. And let me just give you a little hint. So there are going to be a lot of countries that must balance their trade. And they're going to do it with legitimate means with foreign direct investments, and they're going to do it with illegitimate means. Pardon me. I think you get the idea. Langley is involved in a lot of corrupt silos. And they're going to do their dead level best to continue and sustain the dollar in trade. They're going to threaten nations. They're going to murder leaders. They're going to bring about, oh, yeah, in Pakistan, there was a terrorist incident. Remember, I just told you, $100 billion Chinese investment in a Pakistani port to build up their maritime network. And there's a terrorist event right in the middle. Okay, Langley's going to do their dead level best to disrupt things. They've got in the last 3 years, they got a new handy dandy group in Asia to conduct terrorist incidents. Langley's involved in a lot, they call them the silo industries. It's Afghan heroin, it's stolen weapons. You could look at the military budget and all the missing money, and yeah, some of it might have been used to build, spacecraft, anti-gravitational spacecraft, who knows where, to go to a Jupiter moon, whatever. But there's also a lot of it was just plain stolen and sold on the black market. There are lots of Langley businesses. There's no auditing of Langley businesses. There's no legitimacy. There's no forced compliance. So they've got a lot of stored dollars and savings. They don't want it to get reduced by 40 and 60% for purchase power. So I think even Langley is going to be converting their dollar reserves and converting to gold bars. Okay, this is going to be a stampede. It's all the different nations of the world, or the globe, who are stuck with dollars, who are stuck with U.S. dollar-based debt, who are stuck with U.S. dollar-based assets, like a Florida high-rise, commercial or condominium or whatever. They're going to want to convert to gold. I think they're going to go so far as to bring on new debt for their commercial property and buy gold with the money they raise on the debt, so they'll become less dollar risk. This is going to get extraordinary. These are intrigue-filled times.
Yes.
It's going to get so interesting and fun, but dangerous. Let me add another wrinkle here. Some might wonder, gee, Jim, what was the real motive for the United States just ransacking Libya? Did they just want to get rid of Muammar Gaddafi? Is that what it's all about, or do they want to get the gold too? 140 tons of gold. They stole it. Libya will never see it again. I remember a story about 3 years ago. It was a British interview, and they were talking about the conditions. Imagine, the Libyans own the gold, and it's sitting in a British bank, and the British are issuing conditions for returning it. And I thought, oh my gosh, they got 20 conditions. If they satisfy 3, it would be a miracle. The other 17, not a chance. The Libyans will never see their gold again. Well, let me tell you about another angle. It's not just, the gold, and it's not just the active wealth production like their oil industry, because they're still producing a lot of oil. Very little known is that Gaddafi was a good guy. He never sponsored terrorist raids. He never sponsored assassinations. Oh, that's all Washington and London. Gaddafi will go down in Arab history as one of the biggest, developers for the national and common good. He developed a canal system for delivering water. He had tremendous grants, like for students in universities, and it wasn't just his country. Gaddafi, we demonize him, but history will find real favor in his life. Okay, what else is Libya all about? Well, Libya is still a big producer, and I've gotten wind. It's from The Voice and a couple of other elements. There's a plan to have a bunch of different locations in North Africa. I mean, I'm talking about Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, Morocco. It's going to be a string of light industries. And I can't tell you exactly what they're going to be. But just to open your imagination to what wide array of light industries could take place that would have some energy requirements. And the gas from Iran, Ethiopia, and Sudan, the gas from Algeria. Algeria is a big gas producer. Oil from Libya, all the different wealth. New banks spring up with the oil wealth. They don't just chuck it into U.S. treasuries. They start to do something useful with it, because they realize that all their treasury bond investments in the past year has really been to foment war, to build up the military structure, which attacked them. So they're realizing, no, we don't want to invest in treasury bonds that end up building up systems that attack us and render our cities like Beirut. There's going to be Ethiopian gas. There's going to be Qatar gas. There's going to be, I think, railroads to deliver the oil and gas. And there's going to be a string. I'll just make up a number. There are going to be like 6 to 10 different small manufacturing sites all across North Africa. And where will the output go? It'll go to Italy. It'll go to Spain. It'll go to Greece as ports for the European Union. Okay, so the offshore industrialization for Europe will come from North Africa. The funding and other infrastructure buildup will come from the Chinese. All of this will be non-dollar. The Belt and Road, Dave, I believe, is the global economic reset. I believe it's going to have critical mass. And, you can't say, well, gosh, Jim, does that mean they're going to have 70% of global trade? No. Let's watch them move toward 30 and watch it grow, and then have the U.S. forced to join. We're poo-pooing it. We're denigrating. We're saying, oh my gosh, it's just a big ploy for Chinese to infiltrate and get control of the economies and the power structure and political systems all across Europe. Oh, that's what the United States did. No, the United States is accusing China of being on the verge of doing what the United States did. China is trying to set up systems that are not part of fascist trade unions, like the Transatlantic Trade Partnership and the similar one in Asia, that have been declared largely fascist structures with tremendous favor given to corporations for trade violation settlement, patent ownership, trademark ownership, stuff like that. No, the Chinese are going to do the opposite of what the United States has been doing for the last 40 years. And I think they're going to rescue Europe from itself, because Europe is hell-bent on spreading human rubbish in their societies and protecting this rubbish with laws and fines. I have an Italian lady. I don't want to give away a name, but 2 years ago, she started sending me information. She's not a young lady. She's elderly. She's told me, Jim, I'm in my upper 80s, but I know things. I see things. I have friends. She knows of a person who owned a small hotel in Italy. I don't remember the city. I don't always assume it's Rome. Italy is quite diverse. And this friend of hers was forced to sell at an eminent domain price the hotel. And it had 20 rooms. And she said it's all occupied now by Arabs who are on, grants. And they turned it into a shithole. It's garbage everywhere, people hanging out, playing music, doing silly things on the lawn. And they just trashed the whole hotel. Okay, obviously the owner before got compensation. But I said eminent domain, in other words, a discount price. And she knows other people who made open complaints about the Arab behavior, about those assaults, about the robberies on the street. And that person, the few people she knew, they were all fined €1,000 for speaking up. Okay, this is what Europe's doing to itself. But, apart from the Arab influx, they've got other serious problems from lack of industry. I've got a friend here who goes to Spain about once a year. And he reports back to me. He said, Jim, it's so interesting. I go to Barcelona and I don't know what they're saying. It's not Spanish. It's Catalan. It's a dialect of Spanish. And it's not the same. It's got a lot in common, but it's not the same. I asked him once, how much in common? He said, I'm told it's about 60%, 70% in common, but that's not based on my assessment because I don't know what they're saying. I pick up a word here and there, and I pick up a phrase, but I miss a lot. Okay, so he said he goes to Barcelona, he goes to the port cities, he went to Madrid. He said Madrid's fascinating because it's so beautiful. It's a developed city. It's got a lot of museums and churches and just very beautiful city. He said, what I've noticed is that the shops all sell Chinese goods. He said, that wasn't true 10 years ago. He went there 10 years ago. He's been here for 15 years. No, he's been here for close to 20 years. When I got here, I've been here 12 years. When I got here, he said he had been here for about 7 years. So he's close to 20 years now. He said back in in 05, 06, 04, 05, 06, he said, I'd go to Spain, hang out, have fun, and you buy Spanish-made things. He said, they're all gone. It's all import. Okay, so there is some legitimate complaint that the Chinese might infiltrate and just take over the economies and sell their goods and, buy up malls. And before you know it, 80% of what the merchandise is made in China or, made in the Pacific Rim, made in Indonesia, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore. Very interesting times. But so, yes. Focus on this North African project because the United States is trying to continue and enable persistent chaos in Libya to interrupt this plan. We're not about development. We're about destruction. Destruction to sustain the usage of the dollar, which we use in war purposes and not domestic purposes for profitable and peaceful means. We're just a fascist state.
Well, hopefully things are changing and hopefully things are going to be getting better. It's very difficult to turn a system around within, a couple of years. But I do see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think, we could have had war with Syria. We could have continued with that. We could have had war in Ukraine. We could have had war in all these different areas, but in North Korea, we could have invaded, but we didn't.
We could have invaded Venezuela.
We could. I don't think we're going to invade any of these places.
No, we got to build up now of 120,000 troops planned to go nearby Iran.
I think that's, I personally don't believe that whatsoever. I think this is two sides here in America where we're fighting against each other. And I think there's one side that would like war, and there's another side that would like peace. They said the same thing in North Korea. There was a buildup. I remember McMaster saying this. We're ready to go. We have 100,000 people. We're going into North Korea. We have the plans. We're ready to go. And all of a sudden, a peace deal. All of a sudden, there was talks behind the scenes. I think the same thing's happening with Iran because remember, Trump did call out John Kerry. Kerry went over to Iran, and he's part of the people that would like war, and he was forcing Iran to do something completely different than something that the Trump administration wants. And of course, Kerry, who is a citizen now, is violating the Logan Act. He shouldn't be getting involved. He shouldn't be in Iran. He shouldn't be anywhere near that talking to the leaders. But he decided to go ahead and do that. So I think we have here in America, I think we have two sides where you say Langley. I think there's sides here in the United States that are fighting against each other, and both sides are pulling and pushing back and forth. But I think that's going to end. I think we're going to see something change in the next couple of weeks. I think we're going to see a declassification of what was been happening in our government. I think we're going to see an OIG report. I think we're going to see things that come out with Comey that leads back to Clinton, which leads back to Biden in Ukraine. I think there's a lot of things that are about to change. And
the FISA documents too.
That too. I think it's all going to start to come out. And is it all going to happen at once? No, I think they're going to continually leak it out. And I think we're heading towards a change. And I think it's coming very, very quickly.
I describe it as a civil war.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is.
It's the fascists versus the populist nationalists.
Yes.
And the fascists are trying to label the nationalists. The fascists are trying to label the nationalists, people who believe in the United States, make America strong and legitimate and powerful again. Make our country good. Okay, that's opposite of the globalist fascists.
Mm-hmm.
The fascists are trying to make the nationalists look like terrorists.
Yeah.
When the terrorists are the globalists.
Yes.
And again, it's the United States calling the kettle black. We say that the Chinese are trying to do X, Y, and Z, and it's what we do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And it's really sad to watch because I see the reaction from a lot of people, and they don't get it. They don't say, "Oh gosh, that's what we're doing." Instead, they say, "Yeah, let's stick it to them. Back the military. Our troops are risking their lives." Yeah. I tell my dad, "Yeah, they're risking their lives, but do you know, Dad, what we're fighting for in Afghanistan? Where's all the development of the minerals that we talked about? Where's the Chevron pipeline that Condoleezza Rice talked about?" I said, "Dad, we're fighting for heroin production."
Yeah, that's all we're fighting for.
And I said, "Dad, we got hundreds of photos of our military guarding the poppy fields." I said, "I've got clients who know soldiers who were guarding. I know what lies they were told." And he said, "Well, Jim, you know a lot of dangerous information. Be careful." Yeah, but Dad, quit saying the same nonsense. Our troops are not defending our country. They're defending the Langley heroin business. I mean, you could even go to Saudi Arabia. What are we protecting there? Well, they got trade routes for the heroin also. And then we're leaking a bunch of it in northern Iran to ruin their society while we wreck their currency. I mean, gosh, I keep saying to my dad, he got tired of hearing it from me 10 years ago. I said, "Dad, we're not the good guys." He said, "Jim, you got to be patriotic." I said, "Dad, I'm patriotic. I hope we have a movement toward change and cleaning up and reform, but I don't see it. It just gets worse." "Well, be careful, Jim. Well, be careful." Yeah. But he continues, as many people do, to see and conclude we're trying to do nation building. No, we're destroying nations. Look at Beirut. Is that nation building? Are we nation building in Kiev, Ukraine? In the Donbass, are we nation building, Dad? We're not. Oh, something happened, Dave. I got to be careful. I had a best friend. I actually lived with him in Pennsylvania. He was from my high school, and his father died, and I left town, and he adopted my father as his own. He's a nice guy. He's my age, my class. And he called my dad a month ago into my dad's office and said, "Hey, Bob, I want you to see this. I just downloaded something. It's Jimmy." And my dad listened to it. I don't know which interview. It might have been yours. I don't know, Dave. But it was an interview from the last couple months, last 2 or 3 or 4 months. And my dad said, "Jim, you were eloquent. You made good points. You had command of a lot of facts. I understood a lot of what you're saying. I think I understand a good deal of this, but obviously it's very difficult. I'm not a young man anymore. He said, way to go, Jim. That was good. You were articulate. I said, Dad, I'm a chip off the old block. You talked about literature and symbolism, and I talk about finance and, bank fraud. And he said, yeah, I guess so. Anyway, that's...
Jim, hey, listen, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see all your work?
It's www.golden-jackass.com. Since January, we've had a new launch of the hyphen site. It's new. It's got a nicer format. It's wider, easier to read. We're always doing little tweaks, like emphasizing a button to make sure it's well understood how to find things. And it's friendly with the popular handheld devices now. Haven't had a single complaint about using an iPhone or a big tablet or a smartphone. Anyway, there's a public side to it, public interviews and articles, and there's a newsletter side to it, which is paid subscription. I invite people to go to the site, bounce around, sign up for the newsletter. I like to mention some of my favorite compliments. I left your newsletter 4 years ago, came back a year ago. I wish I never left. And the other one is I used to listen to a lot of your interviews and figured that was enough. But 2 years ago, I signed up. I wish I signed up 5 years ago. And there's some other new compliments that I've heard. It's always very, very nice. And even if people depart, they say wonderful things like, I lost my job. I hate seeing that. I lost my job. I have to cancel. So I said, let me add a couple more months there because you've been a good guy for a few years. So this is a very difficult environment. People need to follow what's going on and be aware of plans that are not in the news and that are intentionally omitted in the news so that you are not prepared.
Right.
They don't want you to be prepared. They want you to become a sheep. They want you to become a dumbed-down worker sheep who has no wealth. And I'd like to see that you preserve your life savings and benefit from the crisis that's coming. Crisis in Chinese has an equivalent meaning of opportunity. So this is a big opportunity. Many people are going to get hurt seriously during this reset that should last another 2 years or more.
Jim, once again, thank you very much. Thank you for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. I really appreciate it. Thank you.